If you're still getting what your customers want, you're probably getting it wrong. In today's episode, I'm joined by behavioural design expert Babs Crane, who breaks down how real people make decisions and how to shape your business around that truth.
I think when I explain that to a lot of people, it was that sales job that was the catalyst that got me into what I do now. The thing that I really found was that just saying things in a slightly different way resulted in some pretty big differences in the outcomes of whether a client would take my call, whether I would have an opportunity to quote on a project, whether or not I could influence the sale in some way, shape or form. So it's about understanding how humans behave and what is likely to guide them in a certain way, the behavioural science. And then you have behavioural design using applied behavioural science and behavioural design is that you can help people make decisions they already want to make for themselves.
And the irony is, like, for a lot of us, we probably already employ a lot of the principles ourselves without even realising what it is that we're doing. We just know that it works. Want your customers to actually care? This episode explores how behavioural design helps you cut through the noise and why understanding what makes people tick is your most underrated business tool. Today's guest is Babs Crane, a friend of mine and a behavioural designer and consumer psychologist who uses applied psychology to make businesses more human. She's the behavioural designer and psychologist at Designed, a consultancy that blends design, psychology and strategy to optimise everything from websites and campaigns to employee engagement and customer experience. Armed with a master's in consumer psychology and a background in both commercial design and business development, Babs now helps businesses turn human understanding into real results. Welcome to the show, Babs. I have to say I'm really excited for this episode. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm also really excited. It's lovely to be talking to you.
But do you know what? Testament to how broad the scope of behavioural science is. This is now our third interview on a third separate show that I've run in a completely different space, and it's still relevant. So if you're watching along thinking, behavioural science, is this for me? It's fascinating. Yes, it is for you. It's absolutely for you. Whether you're in a tiny little business and you're a one-person entrepreneur or you're running a much larger business, it doesn't matter. You need to understand behavioural science to be really effective at what you're doing. I want to start back at the beginning, Babs.
Back in the earlier part of my career, I was actually in sales. And I was in quite technical B2B sales as well. So the fact that I'm now 20 years later doing applying psychology kind of feels like quite a jump, I think, when I explain that to a lot of people. But actually, ironically, it was that sales job that was like the catalyst that got me into what I do now. So back in the early
So why did you get
days,
into sales then? Why did you get into sales out of curiosity? Because that's not right. Let's call a spade here. 20 years ago, not many women got into sales.
No, especially not in the construction industry. Yeah.
So why that?
That again, a very interesting point. So, I started off like most teenagers do in retail, the old faithful. Yeah, I know you very much got your background in it as well. So yeah, I was in retail and, just kind of went along. This is obviously very early career stuff that I'm sure most people can relate. Got myself, a weekend job in a really big shopping centre, actually. So I was spoiled for choice of where I could work back in those days. I lived near Bluewater Shopping Centre in Kent. So I had a job there. And I think I chose really well because actually I first of all worked in a Lego shop, which was like the best job you could ever possibly have. You had like you were rotated onto like the play table for an hour and got to build models and stuff. So that in itself, I think I peaked quite early, to be fair with the
That's my end career ambition. You've described it perfectly. Yes.
wholeheartedly recommend. Yeah, and so did that, and then once I left there, I went into musical instruments, and I was selling musical instruments, and that was then much more in the, like, I had sales targets, I was on commission, I was very much, it wasn't just like a shop assistant role, it was a full-time role. Ironically, it's how I met my now husband. So yeah, basically I was like demoing pianos and selling, I can't play a guitar at all, but I ironically sold a lot of them. And so I suddenly realized, before then, I think like a lot of teenagers, and I think a lot of teenage girls would go, oh no, I couldn't ever do sales. Like I'm not a salesperson, because what's a stereotypical salesperson? It's kind of like a quite an extroverted man, I suppose, especially back in those days. So yeah, that's how I started off. And then I moved and I went into like into the B2B world basically, and I started off in Mitsubishi Electric, which is, I'm sure most people have heard of Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi has got hundreds of companies, and I was working in the construction industry at that point. So I was working in an entirely new sales team.
Special shout out in today's episode for our charity partners, ADHD Liberty, led by Sarah Templeton, who are part of the fight to prevent the school to prison pipeline for ADHD and neurodiverse individuals. If you'd like to find out more, you can visit them. The show links are in the notes below, and I would encourage you to go along and have a look and educate yourself on their fight. It's an incredibly important cause, and we're super proud to have them as charity partners for the MarketPulse Pros and Pioneers podcast. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your episode.
And as you rightly pointed out, I mean, sales as a profession was, and probably still is, heavily male dominated. But in particular, like, I was working in a very heavily male dominated industry, and it is still heavily male dominated, the construction industry. So actually, it was really interesting when we started out. There was a team of 4 of us in that team, and it was an internal sales team, and we were looking after and trying to develop business in accounts that, companies that maybe hadn't really heard from Mitsubishi for a while. The external sales team, understandably, were off out, speaking to their long running relationships, and there were like tons of customers in different areas all around the London region, which hadn't really heard from Mitsubishi. So we were kind of tasked with a completely cold sales area each. And we all had our target, and off we went, and we did everything we could to build relationships with these people, because actually that's the thing that it came down to. It was building a relationship. But one of the things that I was acutely aware of right from the outset is how much effort I felt I needed to put into kind of proving my competence. That was something that I really felt I had to do quite early on. And that's kind of a bigger issue, I suppose, or issue might not be the right word, but that's definitely like a feature of often what happens, especially if you're in a role where you've got quite a imbalance between like men and women, for example, or other different characteristics. So if you kind of feel like you might be on the back foot slightly, some people go into that feeling like they have to kind of over prepare, or have that have to really over prove themselves. So I definitely went into it at that age, at the age of 21, with that in my mind. So I was revising all sorts of GCSE physics and trying to become the most valuable asset I could be to these people who hadn't heard from the company in a little while. And in the end, all 4 of us had quite different approaches and how we worked out particular patches that we had, but all of us became actually really successful, and we managed to build up sales areas from invoicing nothing to like far surpassing the sales targets that we were set, and working on good margins and all these things that were obviously really important to the businesses. However, one thing, and this is where the whole spark for understanding humans really, really, really ignited with me, we had quite a lot of training in that role, in that business, which used some personality profiling as part of it. And I was absolutely fascinated by it. And ironically, I'd already been picking up books in bookshops about like body language and understanding personality types and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I was already kind of interested in it. Then I encountered it a lot in the workplace, and it helped. I could see how it really helped sales teams understand each other and how we could maybe understand clients a bit better and communicate between different levels in the, the structure in the business. So I was absolutely fascinated and then I was like, well, I want to know the science behind it. And also I'm like, why, like when I'm picking up these books off the shelves in wherever, how do I know the book that I'm picking up that's really interesting is actually the right thing to be reading? So in the end, that's when I decided for a hobby, and it was very much for a hobby. I'm going to make sure I pick up the right books, and therefore I will pick up the textbooks of a degree. And I enrolled on a degree in psychology, and I did it in my spare time. I just kind of did it over 5.5 years, and I learned all about the science behind those personality profiling frameworks that are used quite a lot in businesses, and some definitely have stood the test of time better than others. But that whole thing, like when I was doing that job and when I was talking to those people, like I say, like on a personal note, I felt like I was going to probably have to prove myself even harder in that role. The thing that I really found was that just saying things in a slightly different way actually resulted in some pretty big differences in the outcomes of like whether a client would take my call, whether I would have an opportunity to quote on a project, whether or not I could influence the sale in some way, shape or form, basically. So that's when I realised there is some science behind this, and it can have like some really big results.
I think for a lot of people, we tend to lump behavioral science and behavioral design into behavioral stuff in my head, right?
Yeah.
Like it's behavioral stuff to the uneducated. But also I know enough about your world to know that there's a clear distinction between the behavioral science and behavioral design. So what's behavioral design then?
So behavioral design is basically, it's where you marry the world of behavioral science. And behavioral science is a catch-all term that is kind of putting together lots of different types of science that all helps to understand human behavior, right? So, and ultimately to help to navigate and steer human behavior in some way. So behavioral science is predominantly psychology, but there's lots of other influences that have come in from the world of economics, sociology, anthropology. So all of these social sciences ultimately are the thing that like make up behavioral science. And that's very much like I say, understanding why people do what they do. Behavioral design is the application of that via some kind of design deliverable. If I can sum it up in a very succinct way, that would be it. So it's about understanding how humans behave and what is likely to guide them in a certain way. That's the behavioral science. And then you have behavioral design, which then understands how almost the psychology of design. So like how we pay attention to certain things, how we remember things, how we process language, all these things, like these kind of cognitive processes that are happening, social influences on us, but like how we lay that out and how we present that visually. That's the behavioral design piece. So it's taking the behavioral science with like an intended outcome of some kind of behavior, and then designing your particular asset, deliverable, whatever it might be. So it could be a web page, it could be user interface of an entire platform, an entire system. It could be an email layout. It could be anything like that. So something kind of visual predominantly, and understanding how our brain processes that visual information to give us the best chance of the behavioral science to land at the end of it.
And I think the beauty of all of this is that, like I said at the beginning, right, it's easily just as applicable to a small single person business as it is to a large multinational, right? The principles are very similar. How you scale it's very different, obviously, but the principles remain the same, and the power is incredible. But there's a power for good and bad, right? Like there's a certain amount of ethics and morals involved, because it's also very easy to steer people down what I call the dark side.
Yes, definitely. And this is the huge theme within like moving into that whole behavioral design piece. And so when you think about like humans and influencing human behavior, and it feels like a really, and understandably so, it feels like a bit of a sticky area to even talk about. And I remember when I told a friend of mine when I decided to do my master's degree in consumer psychology, because I was looking for like an applied area in psychology that tallied up really nicely with kind of what I was doing in the world of design. And I'd already seen earlier in my studies, working on client work, that actually if I designed a magazine page ad, for example, I did a lot of those in like a particular year that I was learning about cognitive psychology on my undergraduate degree. Because I was running the two things side by side, I could already start applying it into my work. And I was already seeing that actually, if I was designing a page ad in a certain way, certain ones were getting much more traction. They were more memorable for the audiences, because certain trade publications you would even ask for it, but you'd get certain insights from it. As part of the advertising team would run certain studies. So that was quite useful to even get that feedback straight away. So when I said, I'm going to go and do consumer psychology, one of my friends, I always remember, she said, does that mean that you're going to give like people therapy if they shop too much? Which, I mean, I can understand why you would land to that when you say consumer psychology. But I also had a few other people saying, oh, that's really interesting. And, oh, that's a little bit, that's a bit of the dark art. And there has been that definitely was, but like some areas of psychology are definitely much more widely accepted than others. And in the UK, consumer psychology hasn't really been as widely accepted, because psychology in the UK as a discipline still sits kind of in that, not exclusively, but a lot of it is in like the therapeutic space. So you have clinical psychologists, you have educational psychologists who are working, with children in schools who needs the additional support of somebody who's highly trained in psychology. You have lots of different areas, but consumer is huge in America, but not so much in the UK. And I think there's always that worry that knowing about what influences human behaviour is a terrible thing. But ultimately, anybody working in any business is trying to influence human behaviour in some way. And the one thing that psychology, if you've got an actual formal training in psychology, the one thing you're taught from day dot is about ethics, and it's about using this for good. And what we've seen with the positive side of using applied behavioural science and behavioural design is that you can help people make decisions that they already want to make for themselves. But they're already motivated to do a particular thing, but it's like they just haven't done it. And actually knowing about psychology can make it a lot easier for them to make the right decision for them. And there's also a really big thing at the minute, and this is something that's been going on for a good few years now, which is talking about sludge processes in behavioural design. So you've got anybody that's encountered behavioural science in the last 10, 15 years probably might have heard the term nudging. And there was a really famous book called Nudge that was written by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, and Thaler won the Nobel Prize for basically this whole theory of like nudge theory, i.e. by kind of just designing the context a little bit better, you could help people reach their desired outcome, goal, whatever it is, a little bit easier. So like you could nudge people to maybe eat slightly healthier in staff canteens by just making the fruit and vegetables a little bit more easy to get to, and maybe make the chocolate and the crisps and stuff a little bit harder, but you don't take away free will and free choice. But most people say, actually, I'd sooner, I know it's better for me if I eat this, and I know it's better for me if I make this decision. But because of the context they're in, they actually then don't end up making that decision, and they maybe make the slightly worse decision for themselves. But obviously people have latched onto this, and this is something that I do see. And like you say, it's really, like it's an important thing to know about, and it makes a big difference in business. Something I've definitely witnessed, especially in like maybe the last 5 years or so, more and more people are aware of like the kind of basics of behavioural science, which is brilliant. Like people are understanding that actually if you frame a message in a certain way, or if you put a particular button on a site, then maybe you might get more traction on that thing. And as you point out, some people have been, then they're using it for maybe not the best intentions. And so, I mean, you see this a lot as well. Just give an actual example of this. Like you see it so much in like unsubscribing from subscription. So when you go to unsubscribe from like any kind of, Amazon Prime or whatever it is, although I have a feeling that Amazon Prime might have changed their flow, but that was definitely a bit of a culprit back in the day of like making it really hard to unsubscribe from a service. That's a sludge practice.
I think I'm right in saying
using...
that America's outlawed this now, right? Like that's part of the new bill that they brought in, is to make unsubscribe very, very simple.
Yeah.
But I mean, to the point where we've got apps being released that you pay a monthly fee for that help you unsubscribe, because it's that hard to unsubscribe from things.
Yeah. So one other thing as well, so the sludge practices have definitely been highlighted, and there's, as you say, it's a lot of stuff now coming in because people realise that actually if you're using this science and you're using it without the best intention, then that can have obviously the outcome that people are potentially worse off. But one thing I will say, when it comes to like applying behavioural science, that there is this other thing, and this is a common, it's something that's widely recognised when it comes to applying nudges. For example, if you're applying these small little changes in like the choice architecture of something in order to help people make a particular decision, we aren't sleepwalking into our decisions a lot of the time. And this is something that if I can, it's one of the areas of the nudging side of behavioural science, because behavioural science isn't just applying nudges to do things. It's like a whole plethora of, there's lots of other influences on human behaviour other than just kind of like how things are laid out and where we're steered to. It kind of has that assumption that we kind of don't really think too much about our decisions, or it's only that influences our decisions. Like the choice architecture is like the thing that influences our decisions, and that's the one thing about learning about psychology that tells you that isn't the case. Like we have other things that influence our decisions more than that. And if people feel like they're being forced into a particular decision, if people feel like they've been forced into a particular outcome, we have this thing called reactance, and that's where people will basically double down, do the opposite potentially, but they will, you really know about it if you feel like you're being forced into something. And from a company perspective and a brand perspective, it is like the most damaging thing you could do. Like if you're setting out with the intentions of forcing people down a certain route to give you certain revenue outcomes, whatever it is, they'll soon feel it and know it, and they will react to it. And that's why it's all about understanding your customer base, and it's all about understanding how they operate and what really motivates them, and then building something around that to help make it easier for them, because you can't actually really force people down a certain route. And if you do, it won't last for long, basically. So.
And the irony is, like, for a lot of us, we probably already employ a lot of the principles ourselves without even realizing what it is that we're doing or why we're doing it. We just know that it works. We've tried it, we've tested, we've iterated, and it works. What I love about what your approach is and the industry's approach is, it makes it scientific. It's about measuring the outcomes and testing A against B to see what is effective and what's not, rather than the standard entrepreneur's approach of, well, I sent that email last week and I think it worked because I got a reply this week. So I'm going to do more of that. And sometimes you're right. And sometimes it's just the luck of the draw. At what point though did you decide that you wanted to go off and like work on your own, like outside of the corporate world? Because like Designed is you've been going 10 years now, right? So was that the finish of your degree coinciding with that?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's something that happened really quite organically. Like, it's not, I didn't go, right, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and I'm going to set out and do this in the same way that I didn't think, oh yeah, I'm going to go and be a salesperson back in the olden days. Like, it's something that just kind of organically, naturally happened. So I was doing the sales role and loved it. I've made friends for life in that place, and I'm still like, I've got the best group of friends from that. So like, just had the best time. But so I was really, because I was getting quite interested in like human behaviour, and I was obviously I'd started this psychology degree by that point. I was getting quite interested in like the marketing side of things and the creative side of things rather than solely sales. I'd had a little bit of, I was doing a bit of that in the role anyway, not so much the creative, but, like writing marketing comms and what have you. And whilst in fact, one of the other things that made it easy for me to go and do this psychology degree in the first place was that my other half was setting up, designed at the time, as a web developer. So because he was quite busy building up that business, I thought, well, now's probably the time that I just make myself busy doing this psychology degree. Like just do it now and get it done. I had no idea what I was going to do with it. Just like I say, interested in human behaviour. So yeah, it came to a point within his business, or within designs, that actually there was a need for me to step into the business on a creative role, basically, and to do creative work. And as I said earlier on, excuse me, one of the earlier parts of my undergraduate degree, like at the time, I was like, I'm interested in human behaviour, and that was quite cool when I was doing my sales role and I could see how it works. And that didn't for 1 minute think it would ever bridge into any kind of creative role. It just was like two completely separate streams of my life at that point. And then I got into learning about cognitive psychology. So that's all about how we think, how we learn, how we pay attention to stuff, how we remember things. And then I realised, like I say, early on, the way things are laid out, the way like different colours of things, the way the shapes of things even can actually have quite a big impact on stuff. So I was already using it within client work. And then I thought, blimey, these two worlds massively collide. And of course they do. Like, why didn't I think this before? But, and so then from that moment onwards, I just thought, well, this is quite an important thing. And this is actually quite a valuable thing because, like you say, behavioural science, we're all humans. We all experience life, right? We all understand what it is like to be a human. And certain parts of psychology, when you learn about why people do the things they do, it makes complete sense. And you go, yeah, of course, totally get that. So it's quite intuitive, some parts of it. But the best thing about behavioural science and psychology is actually you learn the bits that make no sense, as in like you have a real like there is, so it isn't just intuition. There are parts that you like when you learn about actually what's going on under the surface, how that then can have quite a big impact. And I think this is the part where people, if you're not trained in it, can get wrong because you're not aware of the fact that actually something is actually really counterintuitive. So I think
that's what really got me excited about behavioural science in the first place. Was like for 15 years I'd been involved in retail and policing, and I knew by experience that sometimes people were just doing bonkers things for no obvious reason. Like, why would you do that? That doesn't make sense. Why you should be doing that? Like even just sales patterns or shopping patterns or whatever. And I'd be like, right, but this is the way my brain thinks about this, and logically it should be this. But the customers aren't doing that. They're doing this other thing. Why? And then I remember joining a sales demo call with the business where we'd met, like Module CX or TMAC as it was. And I remember Sam Finn doing a demo of a really complex technical product which was aimed at helping coach people. And he was like talking about the colours and why the colours were important to people and how they impacted on their behaviour and their frame of mind and what they were going to be doing and feeling. And the buttons are rounded because, like sharp edges, it's cognitive. And I remember sitting there watching him thinking, is he making all this up? Because if he's not, this is outrageous. Why do I not know this? And I got off the call and I
Yeah.
remember asking, like, did you make all that up just to impress the clients? He's like, no, mate, it's behavioural design. I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, how do I find out more about this? Because this is fascinating, which led you and I to have an initial conversation around kind of marketing emails and all that interesting side of things. And I just think so many people probably know it's out there, know it could help them, but probably assume it's for bigger businesses. And the one thing I want to get across to everyone today, and I've said it a couple of times already, I'm going to say it again, I'm sorry, this is really, really applicable no matter the size of your business, but be careful if you're dabbling in it. You really do need to speak to an expert to get the best out of what you're trying to do with it. You can read all the books you want. The books are fascinating. I've got all the books. I've got Tyler's book. I've got Jez Groom's book. I've got, Cialdini. I've got all sorts of, it's all there. I love them. But I know that the application of it is beyond my capabilities because I'll do something wrong. Somewhere down the line, I will trigger an unintended side effect and I will ruin myself by doing it. Babs, thank you again for being a fantastic guest on the show. I will have to have you back because I'd love to share with the audience, not just your story, but some more of the principles behind things, because I'm sure people have we've whet their appetite a little bit with some of the examples today, but there's some really, really cool use cases and some of the rules and laws. Like, we know things like fear of missing out. Everybody understands that to a degree, but there's more behind fear of missing out than people realise.
Yeah. There's a Nobel Prize behind basically the fear of missing out. So,
there's so much to it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think has prompted it to become really, really popular in the last 10, 15 years is ultimately it can boil down to that one particular principle of the fear of missing out. Huge motivator and driver of behaviour. So yeah, we could do an entire session just on that.
We should. I think we should. So I'm gonna leave the door open for you to come back. But if folks are listening along at home and think, do you know what, I'd love to find out a little bit more about how this might impact my business and how it might help me grow or do better and be more efficient, how can they reach you, Babs?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, first and foremost. Babs Crane. I don't think there's too many of me on there, of people with my name on there. So hopefully you'll find me okay.
I doubt it.
And if not, I'm babs at designed.com, which is DZINED.com. Or babs at mindthehumans.com, which is a separate dedicated consultancy as well. So you'll be able to reach me in one of those three places, and I'll gladly chat to anybody about it.
We'll have to have you back from that business, and then we can talk about that as well, because I need to actually, after we get off the call, after we get off the episode, I need to find out more about it because it sounds incredible, and I don't remember you mentioning it before, so I need to know. Thank you very much for being a fabulous guest, Babs, as ever. That's a hat trick for you, for me. So you're the only guest that's ever been on 3 times in any of my shows, so well done.
Oh, thanks, I'm honoured.
The trophy's in the post.
Thanks.
And thank you at home for coming along, watching, listening, however you're consuming the podcast. As ever, another fascinating guest next week. Thank you so much for your time, and please don't forget to subscribe. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us for today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to feature on a future show, or you've got some ideas for folks who would make a great guest, please drop us a line. Contact details are in the show notes, and I'd love to hear from you. Your host today was me, Paul Banks, founder at Javelin Content Management. Here at Javelin, we specialise in helping busy business owners just like you to repurpose video content, taking all the stress and tech problems away and turning your long-form video into literally hundreds of pieces of content without breaking the bank. We describe it as getting ideas out of your head into video and out to your socials. If you want to launch your personal brand, become the vendor of choice for your audience, or maximise your sales revenue impact, we'd love to hear from you. Join us next Wednesday for the next episode, and don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. Our podcast is only possible with your continued support.